Welcome to the Unseen Shelf. Today, we will introduce Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Step back for a moment and take a look around. Everything you see skyscrapers, smartphones, nations, religions, money, laws exists because of one remarkable species, Homo sapiens. But how did we, once just another animal on the African savanna, rise to dominate the world? This is the story of Sapiens, a groundbreaking journey through human history written by Yuval Noah Harari. In this book, we uncover the revolutions that shaped us, how a simple cognitive shift allowed us to create myths, religions, and cultures that connected millions of strangers, how the agricultural revolution changed our relationship with nature and with each other, how empires, money, and ideologies forged the world as we know it, and how the scientific revolution placed us on the path to unprecedented power, shaping the future of not just our species, but the entire planet. But beneath all our progress lies a question: have we truly advanced? Are we happier, freer, and more fulfilled than our ancestors? Or have we become prisoners of our own success? This is the story of us, the story of Sapiens. And it begins long before recorded history, when we were just another animal of no significance. Let's begin. Harari sets four stages of a human revolution in chronological order. The first stage is about 70,000 years ago. This is called the cognitive revolution. The first chapter of this book is about an animal of no significance. 70,000 years ago, Earth was home to many creatures, each playing its part in the vast web of life. The jungles of Africa echoed with the calls of apes. The frozen lands of Europe were ruled by the sturdy Neanderthals, and deep in the forests of Asia, other ancient humans thrived. In this world, Homo sapiens were nothing special. They were just another species, hunting, gathering, and struggling to survive like their cousins, the Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo erectus. Yet today, sapiens stand alone. The other human species have vanished, leaving only one to shape the destiny of the planet. How did this happen? What made sapiens different from their ancient relatives? If survival was about physical strength, then surely the Neanderthals, built for endurance and the cold, should have prevailed. The Denisovans, too, had carved out their place in Asia. Even Homo floresiensis, tiny humans no taller than a modern child, had adapted to life on remote islands. But sapiens, despite lacking strength or speed, had something else, something unseen yet incredibly powerful. At first, the differences were subtle. Sapiens were not the fastest runners nor the strongest hunters. Their bodies were fragile, their claws and teeth blunt. But unlike any other species, they possessed a mind capable of imagination. This ability to think beyond immediate reality set them apart. Fire became their first great ally, not just for warmth and cooking, but as a weapon that reshaped the land. With fire, forests could be cleared, predators driven away, and food made more digestible, freeing up energy for brain growth. Fire alone, however, was not enough to make sapiens masters of the world. Other human species had learned to wield it as well. The real turning point was not physical, but mental. At some point, sapiens underwent a profound shift, a cognitive revolution. Unlike other animals, which communicated through basic sounds and signals, sapiens developed complex language. This was not just a means of warning or coordination, but a way to share ideas, emotions, and, most importantly, stories. While a band of Neanderthals could cooperate only within small, familiar groups, sapiens could unite under shared myths. They could believe in gods and spirits, in laws that existed only in their minds. And once they could tell stories, they could organize in numbers never seen before. This ability changed everything. A lion might be stronger, a chimpanzee might use tools, but only sapiens could create legends, religions, and civilizations. A small tribe could expand into a powerful collective, connected by belief rather than blood. Suddenly, they could plan, strategize, and trust strangers who share their myths. Over time, this skill allowed them to outcompete other human species. One by one, the Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others disappeared. Some interbred with sapiens, leaving traces of their DNA behind. Others, unable to compete, faded into extinction. What began as an insignificant ape roaming the wilds would soon become the master of the planet. The cognitive revolution had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The Tree of Knowledges of Chapter 2 explores how Homo sapiens gained dominance by developing complex language and shared myths, enabling large-scale cooperation and the creation of imagined realities that shaped human societies. There was a time when the world belonged to many. Different species of humans walked the earth, each surviving in their own way. Some were stronger, better suited for the harsh winters of the north. Others had long endured the dangers of the wild, their instinct honed over millennia. But none of them saw what was coming. None of them could have imagined that one species, small, fragile, unremarkable, would soon change everything. Homo sapiens were not the fastest or the strongest, but they had something no other creature possessed: the ability to believe in things that did not exist. Long before the first temples were built, before kings ruled over lands, before money or nations, sapiens had already begun shaping the world, not with their hands, but with their minds. This was their great secret, a power hidden deep within them, waiting to be unlocked. It began with language. Other animals could communicate, warning of danger or calling for help, but sapiens spoke in a way no one had before. They could describe things not just as they were, but as they could be. A hunter could return to the campfire and tell his tribe not only what he had seen that day, but what lay beyond the hills, what dangers lurked in the dark, and where they might find food tomorrow. But even this was not enough to set them apart. What truly made them unique was their ability to talk about things that weren't real. A lion is a lion, a river is a river, a tree is a tree. These are real. But a spirit that protects the forest, a god that watches over the hunt, a law that must be obeyed, these exist only in the minds of those who believe in them. Yet, these very beliefs became the foundation upon which sapiens built their world. A band of Neanderthals could work together, but only with those they knew personally. A troop of chimpanzees could form alliances, but only through direct interaction. Sapiens, on the other hand, could trust strangers. As long as they shared the same story, they could work together on a scale no other species could match. These stories became more than just words. They created tribes, traditions, and eventually entire civilizations. A shared belief in an ancestor spirit could unite a village. A common myth about the origins of the world could bind together thousands. And as these beliefs spread, so did sapiens. While other human species remained confined to their territories, sapiens moved like the wind, flowing across continents, adapting, conquering, and reshaping the land wherever they went. Somewhere in their journey, they crossed a threshold no one else had crossed. No longer bound by what was real, they could dream of things that had never existed and then bring them to life. They could carve gods from stone, paint visions of unseen worlds, and in time build cities, write laws, and raise armies, all in the name of ideas that existed only in their collective imagination. The tree of knowledge had been climbed, and with it, sapiens had unlocked the power that would make them the most formidable species the world had ever known. They had turned fiction into reality, and in doing so, they had rewritten the rules of survival. From this moment on, the fate of the world was no longer decided by the strongest or the swiftest, but by those who could tell the most compelling story. And Homo sapiens, above all, were the greatest storytellers the earth had ever seen. A Day in the Life of Adam and Eve of Chapter 3 describes the daily lives of ancient foragers, depicting their deep connection to nature, fluid social structures, and spiritual beliefs before the rise of agriculture reshaped human existence. Long before cities rose, before laws were written, before kings and merchants ruled the land, humans lived by the rhythm of the wild. They woke with the sun, moved with the herds, and slept beneath an endless sky. They were not bound by borders or time, nor did they answer to rulers or gods carved in stone. Their world was simple, yet vast, a landscape filled with forests, rivers, and open plains, where survival depended on skill, knowledge, and the deep, unspoken bond they shared with nature. A day in the life of an ancient forager was nothing like the world we know today. There were no fields to plow, no homes to maintain, no taxes to pay. Instead, they moved lightly across the land, gathering fruits, roots, and nuts, hunting when they could, fishing when the rivers were kind. They knew the seasons, the stars, the taste of every berry, and the warning calls of the birds. Every step they took was guided by generations of wisdom passed down through whispers and songs. Unlike the settled farmers who would come later, foragers did not toil from dawn to dusk. Their days were filled with variety. One morning spent tracking deer through the undergrowth, another spent by the water's edge, collecting shellfish and watching the waves. They did not work more than they needed to. There was no concept of hoarding, no reason to store what could be found fresh the next day. Their world was one of abundance, not scarcity. Their social lives were just as fluid. There were no permanent leaders, no rigid hierarchies. The skilled hunter might be respected today, but tomorrow, a wise gatherer could hold the group's attention. Decisions were made through discussion, guided by experience rather than command. Women and men worked together, each bringing something essential to the group's survival. There were no fixed roles, only those that suited the moment. And yet, despite this seemingly peaceful existence, life was not without danger. Predators lurked in the shadows, sudden storms could sweep across the land, and an injury could mean the difference between life and death. But even in hardship, they were not alone. They lived among their kin, surrounded by those who knew their names, their stories, their joys and sorrows. In a world without written history, memory was their greatest treasure, carried not in books but in the minds of their people. But beyond the physical world, there was another, one made of spirits, of whispers in the wind, of unseen forces that shaped their lives. They did not see themselves as separate from nature, but as part of its great, endless cycle. The forest was not just trees, the river not just water. Everything had meaning, everything had life. And so they danced, they painted on cave walls, they sang songs to the spirits of the hunt, honoring the world that sustained them. For tens of thousands of years, this was the human experience. A life without kings, without coins, without written laws. A life woven into the fabric of the land, free in a way that modern minds can barely comprehend. And though the world would change, though fields would be sown and cities built, the echoes of this ancient way of life would remain, hidden in the depths of memory, waiting to be remembered. The time of the foragers would not last forever. A great change was coming, one that would reshape the course of history. Soon, humans would no longer move with the land but bend it to their will. The seeds of civilization were about to be planted, and with them, the world of sapiens would be changed forever. The last chapter of Stage 1 is about the flood. It describes how climatic changes led some human groups to settle in fertile areas, gradually transitioning from foraging to farming, unknowingly setting the stage for the agricultural revolution and the rise of civilization. For thousands of years, humans lived in balance with nature, moving across the land as the seasons changed, never staying in one place for too long. They followed the herds, gathered what the earth provided, and left little behind. The forests, the rivers, the open plains, all of it seemed endless, a world without borders, without walls. But the world was changing. And though they did not know it yet, the lives of sapiens were about to be transformed forever. It began as a shift so gradual that no one could have recognized it for what it was. The warming of the planet melted the vast ice sheets that had once covered much of the Earth, turning frozen wastelands into fertile valleys, filling rivers and lakes with new life. The great herds moved differently now, their migrations disrupted by the changing climate. Some regions, once rich with food, became barren, while others flourished in ways they never had before. What had once been predictable became uncertain. And for sapiens, uncertainty was dangerous. At first, they adapted as they always had. They followed the rivers, the forest, the shifting patterns of nature. But something was different now. As the world changed, some groups found themselves in places where food was no longer scarce but abundant, so abundant that they no longer needed to move at all. They began staying longer in these fertile lands, returning to the same places year after year, watching as the wild grains they gathered grew back in greater numbers where they had been disturbed. Somewhere, someone made the first discovery. Seeds left behind in the soil would sprout again. The hands that had once plucked wild wheat now scattered it deliberately. Slowly, without realizing the significance of what they were doing, sapiens had begun to shape nature itself. They were no longer just foragers. They were becoming something else. For the first time, humans were settling down. They built small, temporary dwellings, returning to the same places season after season. As their numbers grew, so did their dependence on the land. But the land was unpredictable. Droughts came, floods destroyed the fields, and the wild animals that had once roamed freely were now seen as threats to the food supply. To survive, sapiens had to take control. They fenced in the land, domesticated the animals, and turned the chaos of nature into something they could manage. What had once been a world of movement became a world of boundaries. And with boundaries came something new: ownership. The land was no longer free for all. It belonged to those who worked it, those who planted the seeds and reaped the harvest. Disputes arose where once there had been none. Whose land was this? Whose food? Whose labor? The first whispers of power, of hierarchy, of inequality began to take root. Yet, even as they gained control over their environment, they lost something in return. No longer free to roam, sapiens became tied to the land they worked. The variety of their diets diminished, their bodies weakened by the monotonous toil of farming. Disease spread more easily in these settled communities, and where once they had known only small, intimate groups, they now found themselves living among strangers, bound together not by kinship, but by necessity. The flood had come, not a flood of water, but a flood of change, unstoppable and irreversible. The age of the foragers was ending. The seeds of civilization had been planted, and from them would grow cities, kingdoms, and empires. But with this new world came new burdens. And as sapiens took their first steps into this uncertain future, they could never have known the full cost of what they had begun. The agricultural revolution was dawning, and with it, the fate of humanity was about to be rewritten. We are now entering the second stage, the agricultural revolution, which is around 12,000 years ago. Harari is picking up history's biggest fraud in the chapter 5 by exploring how the agricultural revolution, despite promising abundance and stability, ultimately trapped humans in a cycle of hard labor, social inequality, and dependence on fragile food systems, shaping the course of civilization. For countless generations, humans had lived as foragers, moving freely across the land, taking only what they needed. Their lives were varied, their diets rich, their days shaped by the rhythms of nature. But then something changed. Slowly, without fully realizing it, sapiens began to settle down. They sowed seeds, tamed animals, and built homes that would not be left behind when the seasons shifted. They believed they had found a better way to live. But had they? At first, agriculture seemed like a miracle. A single field of wheat could feed far more people than hunting and gathering ever could. Instead of wandering in search of food, humans could produce it themselves, ensuring stability for the first time in history. More food meant more people, and as villages grew into towns, the first great civilizations began to emerge. It seemed like progress. It seemed like victory. But beneath this promise of abundance lay an unseen trap. For the first time, humans became tied to their land. No longer free to roam, they worked from sunrise to sunset, tending crops that demanded constant care. Their bodies, once strong and agile, became bent from labor. Their diets, once diverse, narrowed to just a handful of staple grains. And because more people could now survive, populations exploded, trapping entire societies in a cycle of endless toil. The landowners and rulers prospered, but for the common farmer, life was harder than ever before. Worse still, agriculture introduced a dangerous dependence. A successful harvest meant security, but a bad one meant starvation. A forager could always move to new lands if food was scarce, but a farmer was bound to the soil. As villages grew into cities, wealth and power became concentrated in the hands of the few. Kings, priests, and bureaucrats emerged, governing those who toiled beneath them. Writing was invented not to tell stories, but to record taxes and debts. The world had changed, but not necessarily for the better. And yet, there was no turning back. The agricultural revolution had taken root, spreading from one society to another. What had begun as a choice became a necessity, then an inevitability. The great civilizations of history, Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, were built on this foundation, each more complex and hierarchical than the last. Sapiens believed they had tamed nature, but in truth, they had only chained themselves to it. They had traded freedom for security, variety for stability. And in doing so, they had unknowingly stepped into a future where progress would always come at cost. The great march of civilization had begun. But whether it was a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. Building Pyramids of Chapter 6 describes how the rise of complex societies led to social hierarchies, with rulers using shared myths and beliefs to legitimize power, shaping civilizations through invisible yet powerful structures of control. As villages grew into cities and cities into kingdoms, something strange began to happen. For most of human history, people had lived in small, egalitarian bands, where no one was truly above another. But with the rise of agriculture came a new reality. some people ruled while others obeyed. Societies became vast, complex, and deeply unequal. Yet, instead of resisting this new order, most sapiens accepted it, even embraced it. How did this happen? How do humans go from free-roaming foragers to subjects of kings, pharaohs, and emperors? The answer lay not in force, but in belief. Humans had always been storytellers, but now those stories became tools of power. Across the great civilizations of the world, rulers and priests told tales of divine authority, of sacred laws, of natural hierarchies. They convinced people that some were born to command while others were destined to serve. And so the great pyramids rose, not just from the sweat of countless laborers, but from the power of shared myths. In Egypt, pharaohs claimed to be gods on earth, chosen by the heavens to rule over their people. In China, emperors were said to govern by the mandate of heaven. In India, the caste system divided people into fixed roles, each believing their place in life was determined by forces beyond their control. These weren't just systems of governance. They were stories, woven so deeply into the fabric of society that they seemed as real as the sun and the stars. Of course, not everyone benefited from these myths. Most people were peasants, toiling in the fields, building the palaces of their rulers, paying taxes that kept the elite in luxury. Yet few questioned their place. After all, what could be done against the will of the gods? But power was never absolute. Even the mightiest empires relied on fragile agreements. A pharaoh's rule lasted only as long as his people believed in him. A kingdom could crumble the moment its subjects lost faith in its myths. And when new ideas emerged, whether through war, trade, or rebellion, entire civilizations could rise or fall overnight. The pyramids, the temples, the palaces, they were not just monuments of stone. They were monuments to belief, to the invisible structures that bound millions together. They were proof that the greatest force in history was not gold or steel, but the ability to make others believe in a shared reality. And so, sapiens continued to build, not just structures, but systems, institutions, and hierarchies, shaping the world in ways that would last for millennia. The stories that ruled them would change, but the pattern would remain the same. Memory Overload of Chapter 7 explores how the invention of writing transformed human societies by enabling the storage and organization of complex information, laying the foundation for economies, governance, and the growth of civilization. As human societies grew, so did the complexity of their lives. In the small bands of foragers, knowledge was passed down through memory. Elders told stories, hunters taught their skills, and the group carried all the wisdom they needed in their minds. But now, in cities bustling with trade, laws, taxes, and armies, memory alone was no longer enough. There were too many people, too many rules, too many debts to track. Without a way to record and organize information, civilization itself would collapse under its own weight. The solution came not through stronger rulers or larger armies, but through something far more subtle, writing. What had once been a tool for telling stories now became a tool for administration. The first written symbols were not poems or prayers, but numbers, carved into clay tablets to record trade and taxes. Who owed how much grain? Which land belonged to whom? When must workers deliver their goods? Writing did not begin with philosophy or literature. It began with a need to count, to store knowledge outside the human brain. At first, only scribes and priests could wield this power, trained to read and write in the service of kings and temples. Their records kept the system running, ensuring that food was collected, debts were paid, and laws were followed. But writing did more than organize economies. It shaped reality itself. Laws that once depended on memory became fixed, unchanging, written in stone. History, once passed down by word of mouth, became something permanent, something that could outlive those who had lived it. This shift changed everything. No longer was knowledge carried only in the minds of individuals. It was stored in libraries, on scrolls, and ledgers. And as societies expanded, writing allowed them to govern people they would never meet, to spread ideas beyond the reach of speech. Writing was not just a tool, it was a force that would define the future of humanity. But with this new power came new dangers. What was written could be manipulated. A ruler could rewrite history, a priest could alter the laws of the gods, a scribe could change the numbers in an account. Words, once spoken and forgotten, were now frozen in time, shaping how people understood the past and how they imagined the future. Yet, for all its flaws, writing became the backbone of civilization. It allowed empires to rise, religions to spread, and human knowledge to grow beyond what any single person could remember. And once sapiens had learned to store their thoughts outside their minds, there was no turning back. The flood of information had begun, and from it, the modern world would be born. Do you believe there is a justice in the history? Let's figure it out in Chapter 8. For most of human history, people lived in small, flexible groups where no one held absolute power. But as civilizations expanded, the world became divided, not just by borders, but by something deeper: class, caste, gender, and race. The great empires and kingdoms that shaped history were built on systems of inequality, where a few ruled while the many served. But how did this happen? And why did so many accept it as natural? At first, differences were practical. A skilled hunter was valued for his strength, a wise elder for her knowledge. But in large societies, hierarchy became fixed, passed down through generations like an invisible chain. A person's fate was no longer determined by their abilities, but by the circumstances of their birth. Some were born to rule, others to obey. Some inherited wealth and power, while others lived and died in toil. And yet, people rarely questioned these divisions. Instead, they believed they were part of the natural order. The secret to maintaining inequality was not force, but storytelling. Myths and traditions convinced people that their place in society was predetermined by the gods, by fate, by the laws of nature itself. In India, the caste system dictated a person's destiny from birth, ensuring that generations lived and died in the same roles as their ancestors. In medieval Europe, kings ruled by divine right, their power said to come from God. In many societies, women were seen as naturally weaker, their lives shaped by expectations they did not choose. These ideas were not just rules. They became identities, so deeply woven into culture that they seemed as real as the land itself. But history was not fair. The same myths that justified power also justified oppression. Entire peoples were enslaved, their suffering ignored because it was written into the fabric of society. Women, despite their intelligence and strength, were denied education, rights, and voices in the decisions that shaped their lives. The rich became richer, the poor remained poor, and those who tried to break the cycle often found themselves crushed under the weight of tradition. And yet, inequality was never truly stable. Societies changed, revolutions erupted, and new ideas challenged old hierarchies. The kings of yesterday fell, new leaders rose, and the stories that had once justified oppression were rewritten. But with each change, new inequalities emerged. History does not move toward justice. It moves in cycles, shaped by those who tell the most convincing story. And as long as people believe in the myths that divide them, the struggle for equality will never truly end. The past was never fair. The question is, will the future be any different? Stage 3 is where the unification of humankind is set by how cultures, religions, empires, and trade networks brought the world together. Chapter 9, which is the first chapter of Part 3, describes history is not a straight road. It twists and turns, shaped by chance, ambition, and the stories people tell themselves. For thousands of years, humans have asked the same question. Is history moving towards something greater? Is there an ultimate goal, a final destination? Or is it just an endless cycle, repeating itself in different forms? For most of human existence, change was slow. Generations lived and died in worlds that looked much the same as those of their ancestors. A farmer in ancient Mesopotamia toiled in the fields much like a farmer in medieval Europe would centuries later. The powerful ruled, the weak obeyed, and the rhythms of life remained familiar. But then something changed. The great civilizations of the world began to weave together, their fates intertwined by trade, conquest, and shared ideas. The first great unifiers were money, empires, and religion. Trade routes stretched across continents, carrying silk, spices, gold, and with them ideas. Armies marched, conquering lands and forcing different peoples to live under a single rule. Religious beliefs spread beyond borders, binding strangers together in faith. Over time, the scattered tribes and kingdoms of humanity became something new, one interconnected web, a single global system. But history does not have a master plan. People like to believe that they are marching toward progress, toward justice, toward something better. Yet, history does not care about fairness. It is shaped by those who seize power, by those who control the stories that guide civilization forward. Some societies rise, others fall. Some ideas flourish, others disappear. And yet, despite all the bloodshed and chaos, the trend is undeniable. Humanity is moving toward unity. The arrow of history does not point toward peace or justice. It points toward connection. From scattered tribes to global empires, from isolated villages to a world linked by trade, technology, and shared culture, humanity has been drawn ever closer. But whether this path leads to harmony or new conflicts remains uncertain. The world is no longer a collection of separate histories. It is one. And as sapiens continue forward, they must ask themselves, where does the arrow of history lead next? The Scent of Money, Chapter 10. In the beginning, humans traded with what they had. A fisherman might swap his catch for a hunter's meat. A potter might exchange bowls for grain. But as societies grew, barter became complicated. What if the hunter didn't want fish? What if the potter's bowls weren't needed at that moment? Trade needed something universal, something that everyone agreed had value. And so, sapiens created the most powerful fiction of all, money. Unlike gold or silver, money itself has no real worth. A piece of paper, a digital number on a screen, these things cannot feed a family or build a home. Yet they hold immense power because people believe in them. Unlike kings, gods, or laws, money does not belong to any one culture. It speaks all languages, crosses all borders, and obeys no master. A Roman merchant, a Chinese trader, an African farmer, they could all do business with a simple coin. This belief in money allowed trade to flourish on a scale never seen before. Empires expanded, markets thrived, and once isolated cultures became linked through commerce. But money was more than just a tool. It became a force that shaped history itself. Wars were fought over it. Cities rose because of it. Entire civilizations collapsed when it lost its value. Yet, money's true power lay in trust. Unlike barter, which relied on immediate need, money allowed people to exchange goods and services with strangers, even those they would never meet. A farmer could sell his wheat, confident that the coin he earned would be accepted elsewhere. A ruler could collect taxes, knowing that his treasury would hold value for generations. Money transformed human relationships, making cooperation possible on an unprecedented scale. But with this power came consequences. The pursuit of wealth became a driving force in human affairs, reshaping societies and values. Where once status was measured by wisdom or strength, now it was determined by wealth. Greed, ambition, and inequality followed in money's wake, creating new hierarchies that would define civilizations. And yet, for all its flaws, money remained the great unifier. It broke down barriers, created global markets, and built bridges between cultures. It was the only story that everyone believed, regardless of religion, language, or history. In the end, money was never just metal or paper. It was trust, imagination, and power woven together into a force that moved the world. Imperial Visions of Chapter 11 explores how empires rose through conquest and shared myths, uniting diverse peoples while leaving lasting cultural and political legacies. For most of history, humans lived in small tribes, bound by kinship and shared traditions. But as societies expanded, so did their ambitions. Some sought wealth, others power, but the greatest sought something far more lasting, an empire. Empires were unlike anything the world had seen before. They were not just cities or kingdoms. They were vast networks of people, lands, and cultures united under a single rule. From the Roman legions marching across Europe to the Mongol hordes sweeping through Asia, from the towering palaces of the Chinese emperors to the golden courts of the Ottomans, empires stretched across continents, shaping the destinies of millions. But what made them so powerful? And why did so many accept their rule? At their core, empires were built on two things: conquest and imagination. Conquest brought territory, soldiers, and wealth. But imagination, stories of divine rulers, manifest destinies, and great civilizations, kept them together. The Persian kings claimed to rule by the will of the gods. The Chinese emperors were said to be chosen by heaven itself. The British Empire saw itself as the bringer of civilization to the world. These were not just words. They were beliefs that made empires last. Yet, for all their grandeur, empires were fragile. They ruled over diverse peoples, each with their own customs and faiths. A Roman governor in Egypt, a Mongol warrior in Persia, a British merchant in India. All lived under the same empire, yet saw the world differently. To survive, empires had to be flexible. They adapted, borrowed, and blended cultures together, turning enemies into allies, foreigners into citizens. Latin mixed with Celtic, Persian art influenced Greek architecture, and Buddhism traveled along the Silk Road, spreading from India to China and beyond. But empires did not rule through tolerance alone. They had armies, laws, and taxes that demanded obedience. Rebellions were crushed, dissent was silenced. And yet, despite their brutality, many people embraced empire. It brought roads, trade, and stability. A farmer in a distant province might never see the emperor's palace, but he would use the empire's coins, travel on its roads, and trust its laws to protect his land. Still, no empire was eternal. Rome fell. The Mongols faded. The British Empire crumbled. But though the rulers disappeared, their influence remained. Languages, traditions, and institutions forged under empire outlasted their conquerors. The world today is shaped by these imperial legacies, in borders drawn by long-gone rulers, in the laws we follow, in the languages we speak. Empires may rise and fall, but their visions endure, woven into the fabric of human history. And as long as humans dream of power, of unity, of something greater than themselves, the age of empire will never truly end. Chapter 12 explores the law of religion. For as long as humans have told stories, they have searched for meaning beyond the visible world. In the flickering firelight of ancient caves, in the towering temples of forgotten empires, in whispered prayers and sacred texts, sapiens have sought guidance, purpose, and order. But religion was never just about gods and spirits. It was about unity, laws, and the power of belief. In small tribal societies, traditions and customs were enough to hold people together. But as populations grew, new ways were needed to create order among strangers. Religion became the answer. Unlike kings or warlords, gods could not be overthrown, and divine laws could not be questioned. If the gods commanded loyalty, people obeyed. If they promised paradise, people endured suffering. If they threatened punishment, people stayed in line. At first, religions were local, tied to specific lands and peoples. The spirits of rivers, mountains, and ancestors protected their own, and no one expected others to share their gods. But as empires expanded and trade routes connected distant lands, a new kind of religion emerged, one that reached beyond borders, welcoming all who believed. Hinduism shaped India with its vast pantheon and the rigid caste system. Buddhism, born from a prince's search for enlightenment, rejected hierarchy and spread across Asia, carried by monks and merchants. Christianity began as a small sect in the Roman Empire but grew into a global force, promising salvation to all, rich or poor. Islam, rising from the deserts of Arabia, united diverse peoples under a single God, a single prophet, and a single law. These universal religions did not just offer spiritual guidance. They built civilizations. They created codes of ethics, inspired great works of art, and gave rulers divine authority. But they also sparked wars, divided societies, and justified conquest. Crusaders fought for Christ. Jihads were waged in the name of Allah, and kings ruled by divine right, claiming to be chosen by the heavens. Yet, despite their differences, all religions shared one great power: the ability to unite strangers under a common belief. A Christian in Rome and one in Ethiopia, a Muslim in Baghdad and one in Morocco, a Buddhist in China and one in Sri Lanka, though they had never met, they saw each other as brothers and sisters in faith. But as the world changed, so did religion. Science and reason began to challenge sacred truths. Kings lost their divine right, and in many places, faith became a matter of personal choice rather than law. Yet, even in the modern world, religion remains a force shaping politics, identity, and the way sapiens understand their place in the universe. Empires crumble, borders shift, rulers fall. But the stories of the gods endure, woven into the fabric of history, guiding humanity in ways both seen and unseen. What made one success or fail? Let's find out through Chapter 13, The Secret of Success. For thousands of years, humans have sought the key to power and prosperity. Kingdoms rose and fell, empires expanded and crumbled, and rulers fought to secure their place in history. Some claim their success came from divine favor, others from military might. But beneath these stories lay a deeper truth. History's greatest civilizations thrived not because of gods or kings, but because of their ability to embrace the unknown. The secret of success was not wealth or strength, but curiosity. Societies that remained trapped in tradition, fearing change, eventually stagnated. Those willing to question old ideas, to explore new lands, to challenge sacred truths, they were the ones who shaped the future. For centuries, the great empires of the world, China, Persia, the Ottomans, dominated vast territories. Yet many saw themselves as the pinnacle of civilization, believing they had little left to learn. In contrast, the small divided kingdoms of Europe were restless. They experimented, innovated, and above all explored. Sailors set out across uncharted seas, traders carried ideas across continents, and scientists dared to question what had long been accepted as fact. It was this hunger for discovery that propelled the West into dominance. The conquest of the Americas, the rise of capitalism, the birth of modern science, all stemmed from the willingness to seek knowledge beyond what was already known. The printing press spread ideas faster than ever before. Universities became centers of learning, and the belief in progress took hold. Yet, curiosity alone was not enough. Those who controlled knowledge also controlled power. The ability to navigate the seas, to master new technologies, to understand economics and politics, these became the real weapons of empire. Spain, Portugal, Britain, and the Netherlands did not just conquer lands, they conquered information. They mapped the world, studied its peoples, and used this knowledge to reshape history. But success came at a cost. The same ambition that drove innovation also fueled exploitation. The pursuit of profit led to the transatlantic slave trade, the destruction of indigenous cultures, and the relentless competition for resources. The thirst for knowledge was not always pure. It was often accompanied by greed, by the desire to dominate rather than to understand. Even today, the secret of success remains the same. Nations, businesses, and individuals rise and fall based on their ability to adapt, to learn, to see what others cannot. The story of Sapiens is a story of discovery, of pushing beyond what is known into the vast unknown. And as long as humans continue to seek, to question, and to explore, their success will never be complete, for there will always be more to uncover. The world belongs not to those who hold on to the past, but to those who dare to shape the future. We are here at the final stage of the scientific revolution from 500 years ago to today. Harari describes that the rise of modern science, capitalism, and the potential future of humanity is claimed by how the realization of ignorance sparked the scientific revolution, leading to groundbreaking discoveries that reshaped human understanding and propelled the modern world forward. Let's explore Chapter 14, the discovery of ignorance. For most of human history, people believed they already knew everything that mattered. The world was explained through myths and traditions, passed down from ancestors and written in sacred texts. The gods had created the universe, kings ruled by divine right, and everything had its proper place. There was no need to search for new knowledge, because the answers had already been given. But then something changed. In a corner of the world, in the small divided kingdoms of Europe, a radical idea took hold. Perhaps we do not know everything. This simple realization would change the course of history forever. Unlike the great empires of the past, which saw themselves as the pinnacle of civilization, the thinkers of the Renaissance and the scientific revolution dared to admit their ignorance. Instead of relying on ancient wisdom, they began to ask new questions. Could the earth revolve around the sun? Could diseases be caused by invisible creatures? Could humans fly? Instead of looking to priests for answers, they turned to observation, measurement, and experimentation. This new way of thinking, science, was not just about discovering facts. It was about embracing uncertainty. Scientists did not claim to have all the answers, but they believed they could find them through reason and evidence. Galileo pointed his telescope at the stars and saw moons orbiting Jupiter, proving that the heavens were not as fixed as the church had claimed. Newton watched an apple fall and realized that the same force that pulled it to the ground also guided the planets in their orbits. Each discovery shattered old beliefs, replacing them with new ones that could be tested and improved. But science alone did not change the world. It needed something more: money and power. The same curiosity that drove scientific exploration also fueled conquest and empire. European rulers, eager to expand their wealth, funded explorers to chart new lands and merchants to open new trade routes. The pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of profit became intertwined. The same minds that mapped the human body also mapped the coasts of Africa and the Americas. The same spirit of discovery that built telescopes also built cannons. This combination, science, capitalism, and empire, allowed Europe to rise above the once great civilizations of Asia and the Middle East. The discovery of ignorance had created something unprecedented, a world driven not by certainty, but by endless questioning. And once sapiens had embraced the idea that they did not know everything, there was no turning back. The modern world was born not from answers, but from the willingness to ask better questions. The marriage of science and empire in Chapter 15 explains how science and empire became intertwined, with scientific advancements fueling conquest and colonial expansion, while empires provided the resources and opportunities for further discoveries. For centuries, empires had risen and fallen through conquest, religion, and trade. But in the modern era, something new fueled their expansion: science. No longer was power based solely on swords and ships. It was built on knowledge. The rulers who understood this would go on to dominate the world. The great European empires, Spain, Britain, France, the Netherlands, did not just send soldiers to conquer new lands. They sent scientists, cartographers, and engineers. When explorers set sail, they were not just looking for gold and spices. They were mapping coastlines, studying local plants, and cataloging new species. Every discovery, every new piece of knowledge strengthened their grip on power. Science and empire became inseparable. European nations funded research that served their ambitions, and in return, science gave them an edge. Advances in navigation allowed ships to travel farther. Medical breakthroughs kept soldiers and sailors alive in foreign lands. New weapons, from muskets to steam-powered battleships, ensured military superiority. Knowledge was no longer just for scholars. It was a tool of conquest. But the relationship between science and empire was not one-sided. Just as rulers used science to expand their empires, scientists used empire to expand their knowledge. The vast colonies of Europe became laboratories, where researchers studied everything from botany to anthropology. They dissected foreign plants, experimented with new medicines, and documented unfamiliar cultures, all in the name of progress. Yet, this pursuit of knowledge often came at a cost. The same curiosity that led to medical discoveries also justified racial theories that dehumanized entire populations. The same desire to understand nature fueled industries that exploited people and resources. Despite its dark side, this union reshaped the world. The Industrial Revolution, the spread of capitalism, and the rise of global trade were all built on the foundations laid by science and empire. Railways connected vast territories. Telegraphs carried messages across oceans, and factories powered by steam and electricity transformed economies. Europe, once just one part of a diverse world, became the center of global power. But no empire lasts forever. The same knowledge that built European dominance would eventually challenge it. As new ideas of freedom and equality spread, the very foundations of empire began to crack. The marriage of science and empire had created the modern world, but had also planted the seeds of its own downfall. And so, sapiens continued forward, caught between discovery and domination, progress and oppression. The quest for knowledge had reshaped history before, and it would do so again. But the question remained: who would control it next? It was measured in land, gold, or the power of kings. But then something changed. A new force emerged, not armies or empires, but an idea. It was invisible, yet it shaped the fate of nations. It had no throne, yet it ruled the world. That force was capitalism. At its core, capitalism is built on trust, trust in money, in banks, and the promise of future growth. Unlike traditional economies where wealth was fixed, capitalism thrived on expansion. Instead of simply redistributing existing resources, it encouraged people to invest, take risks, and create more wealth than had existed before. And so the modern economy was born, not from gold locked away in vaults, but from loans, credit, and the belief that tomorrow would be richer than today. The magic of capitalism lay in its ability to turn ideas into wealth. A merchant in Amsterdam could borrow money to build a new ship, promising future profits in exchange for investment. A banker in London could fund an expedition across the seas, expecting a return on his gamble. Unlike feudal lords who hoarded their riches, capitalists reinvested, fueling a cycle of growth that transformed the world. But capitalism did not spread on its own. It needed protectors, governments and empires willing to enforce its rules. The British Empire, for example, did not just conquer land. It built trade networks, secured shipping routes, and created markets for its goods. Companies like the Dutch East India Company were not just businesses, they were powers in their own right, with armies and territories under their control. The line between commerce and conquest blurred, as wealth and war became two sides of the same coin. Yet, capitalism was not without its price. The relentless pursuit of profit led to exploitation of people, of resources, of entire continents. The Atlantic slave trade, the forced labor of colonies, the destruction of indigenous economies, all were justified in the name of economic growth. The same system that built railroads and factories also deepened inequality, concentrating wealth in the hands of a few while millions toiled for survival. Still, capitalism endured because it delivered results. It created prosperity, funded scientific breakthroughs, and improved countless lives. It rewarded innovation, encouraged efficiency, and adapted to changing times. While other ideologies faded, capitalism only grew stronger, shaping modern economies, governments, and even the way people viewed success itself. The world today runs on capitalism, not because it is perfect, but because no alternative has yet surpassed it. It is a system built on ambition, on risk, on the belief that growth has no limits. And as long as humans continue to chase wealth, the capitalist creed will remain unbroken. But with great power comes great uncertainty. Can capitalism survive its own excesses? Or will the very forces that made it unstoppable one day bring it crashing down? Chapter 17, The Wheels of Industry, explores how the Industrial Revolution transformed human society through machines, speed, and mass production, creating both unprecedented progress and deep social inequalities. For thousands of years, human life had followed the rhythm of nature. The sun rose, people worked the land, the seasons changed, and time moved slowly. But then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Smoke filled the skies, machines roared to life, and cities stretched toward the heavens. The Industrial Revolution had begun, and the world would never be the same. At first, it seemed like just another invention, a faster loom, a stronger plow, better way to smelt iron. But these machines did something no tool before had done. They multiplied human power. A single steam engine could do the work of hundreds. A factory could produce in days what once took months. Where once people relied on muscle and animals, now they had coal, steam, and electricity. The old ways crumbled as machines took over, reshaping economies, societies, and even the way sapiens saw themselves. The first great transformation was speed. Trains raced across continents, ships powered by steam defied the winds, and messages that once took weeks to deliver traveled instantly by telegraph. For the first time in history, distance no longer dictated destiny. Trade exploded, cities swelled, and the world grew smaller. But with speed came scale. Factories didn't just replace workshops, they created something entirely new: mass production. Goods that had once been rare and expensive became cheap and available to all. Clothes, furniture, even food were no longer luxuries but everyday necessities. And behind it all was a single, relentless force: efficiency. Faster, cheaper, more productive, this was the new creed of industry, and those who could not keep up were left behind. Yet, for all its wonders, the Industrial Revolution had a dark side. Millions left their villages for crowded, smoke-filled cities where they worked endless hours in dangerous factories. Wealth grew, but so did inequality. The powerful thrived, while workers toiled in brutal conditions. Cities became symbols of both progress and suffering, monuments to human ingenuity and human cost. Still, there was no turning back. Machines had rewritten the rules of civilization. The old world of peasants and artisans faded, replaced by one of engineers, financiers, and industrialists. The future belonged to those who embraced the machine, who understood that the wheels of industry would keep turning faster and faster, shaping the destiny of sapiens in ways they could not yet imagine. The age of industry had begun. But where would it lead? The Industrial Revolution created an ongoing cycle of rapid change, transforming technology, society, and human life in ways that continue to accelerate. The world had always changed, but never like this. For most of history, progress was slow, measured in generations. A farmer in medieval Europe lived much like his ancestors. A craftsman in ancient China used the same tools as his grandfather. But then the rules of time itself seemed to break. Within a single lifetime, everything could change. Machines replaced muscle, new inventions reshaped entire industries, and the pace of life accelerated beyond anything sapiens had ever known. The Industrial Revolution had set something in motion that could not be stopped. Unlike previous revolutions, which reached a peak and then stabilized, this one fed itself, growing faster with each passing year. New discoveries led to new industries. New industries led to new demands, and the hunger for innovation became insatiable. The cycle of progress had no end. At the heart of this revolution was energy. For centuries, humans had relied on wood, wind, and water. Then came coal, steam, and oil, unlocking power on an unimaginable scale. Factories ran day and night, railroads stitched continents together, and electricity turned darkness into light. As sapiens harnessed the forces of nature, they reshaped the planet itself, digging deeper, building higher, reaching farther. With this power came new possibilities. Science, once the pursuit of a few scholars, became the engine of civilization. Medicine advanced, curing diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. Communication stretched across the globe, shrinking distances with telegraphs, telephones, and eventually radio waves. War, too, was transformed. Rifles replaced swords, tanks replaced horses, bombs fell from the sky. But the revolution was not just technological, it was social. The rise of industry shattered old traditions. Families moved to cities, abandoning the rural life that had defined humanity for millennia. Monarchies crumbled as new ideologies, capitalism, socialism, nationalism took hold. The idea that life had a fixed order gave way to something radical, the belief that the future could be shaped, that progress was not just possible but inevitable. Yet, with each step forward came new uncertainties. The speed of change left many behind, struggling to adapt. The power of industry fueled both prosperity and destruction. Cities grew richer, but the gap between the wealthy and the poor widened. Machines made life easier, but they also made war deadlier. The world was no longer just moving, it was accelerating. And so, sapiens found themselves in a new reality, one where the only constant was change. The revolution that had begun in the factories of the 18th century had never ended. It continued to this day, shaping the modern world, pushing humanity toward an unknown future. The question was no longer whether sapiens could change the world. It was whether they could control the forces they had unleashed. What is the next once survival is no longer the primary challenge. Did we live happily ever after? Sapiens battled hunger, disease, and war. Life was fragile, ruled by forces beyond human control. A bad harvest could mean starvation, a plague could wipe out entire cities, a single battle could decide the fate of empires. But then, in the blink of history's eye, everything changed. In just a few centuries, humans achieved what once seemed impossible. Famine, which had haunted every civilization, became rare. Medicine conquered diseases that had tormented sapiens for millennia. Smallpox was eradicated, infant mortality plummeted, life expectancy soared. Even war, the constant shadow over human history, became less common. For the first time, entire generations in some parts of the world grew up without experiencing large-scale conflict. Prosperity spread. More people had access to education, healthcare, and comfort than ever before. Electricity lit up homes, clean water flowed from taps, food was available in abundance. Science and technology made life easier, safer, longer. If an 18th century peasant had glimpsed the modern world, he might have mistaken it for paradise. And yet, despite all this progress, sapiens were not necessarily happier. Anxiety, depression, and loneliness spread as fast as prosperity. The comforts of modern life did not always bring contentment. With survival no longer the main struggle, humans found themselves searching for new meaning. Religion, once the foundation of existence, lost its grip in many societies. Ideologies rose and fell, but none seemed to fill the void. Meanwhile, a new question emerged. If sapiens had mastered nature, what came next? Medicine no longer just cured disease. It sought to enhance the human body. Science no longer just explained the world, it aimed to redesign it. Technology promised not only to improve life, but to change what it meant to be human. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and biotechnology hinted at a future where sapiens might no longer be sapiens at all. For the first time in history, humans were not just shaping the world, they were reshaping themselves. And in doing so, they faced a question no civilization had ever asked before. What do we want to become? The struggle for survival had defined humanity for millennia. Now, with that struggle largely won, a new challenge awaited. The story of sapiens was no longer just about overcoming nature. It was about deciding their own destiny. But would they choose wisely? Are we aware that a new species was waiting to be born? The only question was who or what would they become? The final chapter claims the end of Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens ruled not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they could adapt. They tamed fire, invented agriculture, built cities, and created empires. They reshaped the world to fit their needs. But now, for the first time in history, they were on the verge of reshaping themselves. Science and technology had already transformed human life. Medicine extended lifespans, machines replaced physical labor, and computers surpassed human memory. But something even greater was coming, something that could change the very definition of what it meant to be human. Biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and genetic engineering were no longer ideas from science fiction. They were real, advancing at a pace faster than sapiens could comprehend. Scientists could already edit DNA, manipulate embryos, and grow organs in labs. Artificial intelligence could process information faster than any human mind. Brain-machine interfaces hinted at the possibility of merging thought with technology. For the first time, sapiens were no longer just evolving through natural selection. They were taking control of their own evolution. They could design smarter children, enhance their bodies, and even strive for immortality. But with this power came questions no civilization had ever faced. If humans could live forever, what would happen to society? If machines became more intelligent than sapiens, who or what would truly be in control? And if sapiens could modify themselves beyond recognition, would they even be sapiens anymore? The species that had conquered the world now stood at a crossroads. Would they use their power to create a utopia, free from suffering and limitations? Or would they lose themselves in their own creations, giving birth to something new that no longer resembled what had come before? For thousands of years, history had been the story of Homo sapiens. But perhaps that story was reaching its final chapter. Perhaps the future did not belong to sapiens at all, but to something beyond them. History has always been written by those who dare to imagine. And as sapiens step into the unknown, one thing remains certain: the next chapter of our story has yet to be told. Today we explored Sapiens. The story of Homo sapiens is one of survival, curiosity, and transformation. From insignificant foragers to rulers of the planet, we have shaped the world in ways no other species has. But now, as we stand on the brink of a new era, the greatest question is no longer where we came from, but where we are going. Will we use our knowledge to create a better future, or will we lose ourselves in our own inventions? Thank you for your time and thoughtful engagement. If you have any reflections, insights, or topics you'd like to explore further, we'd love to hear from you. We look forward to seeing you again for our next book discussion. If you enjoyed this content, your support through a subscription and a like is truly appreciated. We will see you soon with the next book.